this time, the state would call Dr. Karie Gibson.
Your Honor, I will be objecting to this witness. This is a FBI profiler who has no individual information about Austin Thompson. I cannot imagine how this is relevant at a sentencing hearing. She doesn't know anything about Austin or this crime. We have admitted he committed a mass shooting. I cannot foresee how this is helpful at this point.
Your Honor, Dr. Gibson is the unit chief of the behavioral analysis unit of the FBI. She has extensive experience researching, studying targeted violence resulting in mass casualties. She is a published expert in this field. She is a frequent speaker and trainer of law enforcement and other stakeholders in the topic of the identification, prevention of mass shootings. She is a licensed psychologist and can certainly present to the court a subject matter expertise of these types of situations, and will be able to provide what we believe would be relevant evidence for the court to hear. Certainly would ask that Your Honor receive her testimony, and if Your Honor decides that it is not relevant, you can certainly make that determination. But we believe that she would be relevant in explaining some of these overarching themes of what we've got here.
Anything further?
No.
I will receive the information. I don't believe that simply receiving it would rise to a level that it would be so prejudicial that it would render these proceedings fundamentally unfair. Obviously, as the court receiving this information, I will assign whatever weight it is due. I accept the fact that the defense has pointed out that this witness has not examined Mr. Thompson, has no personal knowledge of Mr. Thompson, but I'm also do find that it may be relevant and probative to hear overarching theories that this witness may have to offer the court. So I'm going to receive it and assign whatever weight and relevance I deem appropriate after I've conferred all of the evidence in this case.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state would call Dr. Gibson.
Come on up, Dr. Gibson. Good morning, Dr. Gibson. Place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right, face me forward.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, baby.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Gibson. Can you just introduce yourself to the court and spell your last name for the court?
Yes. My name is Dr. Karie Gibson. It's Karie, and the last name is Gibson.
And how are you employed?
I am a supervisory special agent with the FBI.
And how long have you been in that particular role?
So I've been a special agent with the FBI for over 19 years, but specifically a supervisory special agent for almost 11 years now.
And can you tell the court what you do in your current role?
Currently, the last 4 years, I've been the unit chief of the Behavioral Analysis Unit 1, where our mission is to prevent acts of terrorism and targeted violence. So I lead a team of around 20 individuals where that is our focus, to be proactively involved in the prevention of mass violence and terrorism. In that role, we provide behavioral support to our local, federal, and state law enforcement officers in the cases that we provide assistance with.
And prior to this role, what other roles have you had with the FBI?
Prior to becoming the unit chief of the behavioral analysis unit, I was a profiler there for almost 7 years in the same unit, working to prevent acts of targeted violence and terrorism, responding to active shooter events, as well as completing research and publication on those events. And then prior to that, I was a special agent in the FBI's Minneapolis division.
And prior to joining the FBI, what did you do?
I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and so I was an active duty Air Force psychologist for 4 years. And then after I left the United States Air Force, I worked for 1 year for Washington State Hospital, completing court-ordered assessments such as competency to stand trial, mental state at time of offense, and civil commitment proceedings.
And you mentioned, are you still a licensed psychologist?
Yes, I am. I hold a license in the state of Minnesota since 2005, and in the state of Virginia, or the Commonwealth of Virginia, since 2023.
And do you hold any other licensures?
No other licensures, no.
In terms of, I think you mentioned, can you describe some of the research that you've done and publications, if any, that you've participated in or written yourself?
Sure. So for the role, one of our primary roles at the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit is to provide resources and research to really inform whatever fact pattern that we're looking at, to really understand how we can be proactive and helpful in that space. And so in my unit of the Behavioral Analysis Unit 1, our focus is obviously on prevention. And so our first publication that I had the opportunity to be a part of, I was one of 9 authors. It's Making Prevention a Reality, where really it's a resource, a compendium of key data that's important, that focuses on how do you identify, assess, and manage the concern for targeted violence. That was published in 2017. From there, we've gone on to really try to understand the difference between individuals that go on to commit an act of targeted violence versus somebody who is on the pathway to violence who does not commit an act of targeted violence. And all of that is done in the spirit to inform prevention so that we can help move people off of the pathway to violence before an attack happens.
And do you you've mentioned some trainings, do you speak to training groups about this and other people involved in this type of work?
Yes, over the last 11 years, I've been very active in providing training to our local, state, and federal law enforcement partners, both in the United States and internationally, as well as other members of our community, to include mental health practitioners, school administrators, college administrators, again, trying to get that training and on the pre-attack behavior indicators of what to look for to be able to inform those prevention efforts.
And have you testified in court about this subject matter before?
Yes, I have.
Okay, approximately how many times, do you know?
So I have testified in federal court one time on the pathway to targeted violence, and then I have testified numerous times as a subject matter expert in state court related as a clinical psychologist.
Your Honor, this time would tender Dr. Gibson as an expert in the field of targeted violence.
Any objection?
No objection to the tendering.
All right, her testimony will be received as proper.
Dr. Gibson, you mentioned one of those articles that you were involved in. You were an author being Making a Prevention a Reality. Did you also author an article entitled Pathway to Targeted Violence and Early Intervention Work?
Yes, I was one of the authors on that. It was published in 2024.
And did, Your Honor, if I could approach, I'd like to provide to the court what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 25, which is a binder containing both of those articles as well as Dr. Gibson's CV.
Yes.
So, Dr. Gibson, can you tell the court what is targeted violence?
Yes, so when we're looking at these cases, targeted violence is a term that was coined in 1999 by Dr. Robert Fine and Brian Boskuhl with their different research that they completed and related specifically to assassins and attempted assassins. And what they found in that research is that they follow a very specific trajectory when they go on to commit that attack. And that's where targeted violence term was coined, and it means specifically targeting an individual or person or agency or entity related to that attack.
Okay. And that can be opposed to what kind of violence?
So targeted violence is specifically referring to predatory violence, where someone considers, plans, and prepares before they commit that attack. And that's different from effective violence, where it's more of an emotional violence, more of a response to an emotional situation, where you have someone who reacts in that moment and haven't previously planned to do anything in that moment.
And this has been your kind of focus area of research and study and work for how long?
For the last 11 years that I've been at the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit.
And when we talk about acts of targeted violence, based on your research, is it common for this to be a targeted act of violence to be a first kind of offense, or is this something that someone has done multiple acts of violence and ends up at a targeted act?
So in these cases, the challenge is that when you're looking for individuals that are progressing on the pathway to violence to commit this type of an act, there's a lot of considering, planning, and preparing that goes into it, but it can definitely be the first time that they do any type of violence can be the actual targeted violent attack. And that can be the challenge in the prevention space, is that if we go off of if someone was violent in the past to really inform us of their violence in the future, we find that that's not very accurate or very helpful in this space. That really we have to go at what are the behaviors that we're seeing and observing, and what is that fact pattern when you put it into the different factors of the research, what's enhancing to targeted violence.
Now, you've mentioned the pathway to violence. Can you just briefly kind of give us an overarching view of what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. The pathway to violence has been around since the 90s. It was first comes into concept in 1998 with Dr. Fine and Brian Boskuhl from the United States Secret Service. And they had culminated this 5-year study related to the assassins and the attempted assassins that I talked about that started in 1992. Ultimately, out of that research, they see that these individuals who were committing these assassins or attempted assassinations followed a very specific trajectory. They consider planned and prepared. In 1999, we see that that same type of concept related to targeted violence, that term gets coined. It gets applied to school violence and school shootings, where they looked at 37 cases of school violence, and they found that those same concepts, that trajectory where people consider planned and prepared, was also applicable to school violence. Then we have in 2003 Calhoun and Weston, who then augment those thoughts and considerations that were found from that operational research that was conducted in the 90s, and they develop a very specific graph that shows those steps and really where you get the formalized steps of the pathway. And really in that concept, what we see is that the pathway starts with a grievance. It can be a personal slight, it can be a humiliation, it can be something that's unbearable, it can be real or perceived, something that they struggle to move past. It also is incredibly individualized for that person. And so they are in that space where they have a problem, they're trying to figure out how to solve it, and then it progresses to the next step. And I'm happy to go on if you want me to.
Well, I want to stop you there. You mentioned a kind of very specific graph. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 26 and ask you Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
You're going to move to admit States Exhibit 26 and publish on the screen.
This one up.
No further objection beyond my initial, Your Honor.
All right, objections noted. Second rule, it's allowed.
So, Dr. Gibson, what we've got on the screen, this is this what you've referred to as the kind of the chart of the pathway to violence?
Yes, it is.
And can you talk to us? You just mentioned grievance, and that is typically how things, maybe the first step. Is that fair?
Correct.
Okay. And you mentioned several different types of grievances or things that could be real or perceived grievances. Right? Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yes, and so when you have an individual that is beginning to progress in the pathway to violence, there is this, the grievance, like I said, a personal slight or an injustice that has occurred for them. And for them, they're trying to work through that to really understand what it means and what they can do with it. And it really is based on perception. And so it really can be real or perceived. So if I was in the same situation with an individual, for example, I may find the situation that was upsetting or the problem that they're struggling with not to really be something of that significance. But for that person, it may be very significant. And that's really what matters in this case, is the person's thoughts and feelings related to those issues connected to the grievance.
And so this is would this be something that's very personal to them?
Yes, it's a very personal journey for them.
And in your research, because of the fact that this is very personal, is this something that is can be hard to observe?
Yeah, so in our research, what we've found is that a lot of times we are able to see the grievance, where we're able to see somebody, that injustice or that slight that has happened to them that they're holding on to. But in our research, we found in 21% of the time that we weren't able to determine the grievance. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's not there, but one explanation is that it's highly personal and it would require that person to inform the specifics of the grievance.
And you mentioned, so what types of things fall into kind of a bucket of grievances that your research has shown?
So there can be several different factors here. You can have, like I said, you can have a slight that has happened to them, a humiliation that has occurred, some type of embarrassing situation that they can't move past, that they're holding on to. You also can have more global grievances. You can be hopeless and helpless and frustrated, just in general, more globally. And then you can also have more of personally driven reasons as to why you are in that space, right? That the key things specific to that individual, their life, that really keeps them anchored in being potentially a grievance collector or being upset with the injustices that they've have occurred in their life.
And can you explain to the court how maybe a desire for notoriety would play into this grievance stage?
Yeah, so sometimes when we're looking at the grievance factors, what we will see is that somebody is really angry and frustrated with being a nobody, and they really seek to be a somebody. And so you find that you have this real perversion of notoriety, that perversion of glory that could occur, that really propels them into that, wanting to have that notoriety to really help demonstrate the wrong that has happened to them and make it right.
And sometimes along this, in the grievance stage, there's also, your research has indicated, besides just the desire to solve this problem, sometimes you see the desire to kill and or be killed. Is that fair?
Yes, and so when we are having individuals that are progressing on the pathway, those are different aspects that you can see, that there is a desire for them to kill or a desire to die that's associated with that, and that really kind of progresses into the next step of violent ideation.
And so talk to us, so that would be the next step along this pathway. And just generally, is this a static kind of flow, or?
No, it's fluid, and so the staircase, depiction of it makes it seem like it's static, like you do one, it goes to the next. But individuals can progress on the pathway. They can go forward through the steps. They can go back off the pathway. They can potentially have overlap in the steps on the pathway. So it's not as static as it appears for the imagery.
So talk to us about what you mean by violent ideation and how that appears.
So when we have somebody that's entered onto the pathway to violence and they've established that first step of that grievance, that slight, that humiliation or injustice that has occurred for them, they're struggling with how to solve that grievance, how to resolve it. And a lot of times they lack the skills and ability to do that. And as they are sitting there in that space of trying to figure out how to resolve it, it progresses into violent ideation. And that really means that they're looking for options and they can't find any non-violent options to resolve that grievance. So then they begin to really focus on violent ideation, and in that violent ideation, that can be suicidality, it can be homicidality, it can be consumption of violent content online, it can be consuming violent imagery with movies and different things in that nature, but really kind of being marinating in violence on that step of the pathway.
And with regard with the consumption of violence, we have. Unfortunately, we have a lot of, celebrity type folks who have committed murders, or I guess I'll put that in quotes, celebrity, famous people who have committed murders. How does that play into this violent ideation aspect of the way?
So when you have somebody that is sitting in this space of violent ideation, and they come to that conclusion that it's only through violence that they can resolve their grievance, then you see them start to progress on the pathway, and the next step is research and planning. And in that research and planning is where they will likely encounter key attackers that have perpetuated different violent acts. We find that there becomes a fascination with prior attackers, that there is almost sometimes a fixation on them, and they really start to research specific details about those attackers. And then sometimes what you'll find where they focus that attention is on an attacker that they feel closely represents them or their struggles, or that they start to really see themselves in that attacker.
I want to go, I'm sorry, I've got a little bit ahead, but I'm back into violent ideation. Some of the things that you mentioned, kind of this consumption of violence, besides just violent images and violent videos, can that include different types of violence?
Yes, it can.
Emotional violence, sexual violence.
Yes, what you find is that when they're in this space, they're really starting to find comfort with violence, and it can permeate into other type of violent encounters or different violent material that they're reviewing. And again, it's that theme of marinating in violence that you see as more of a constant.
Could that include video games, pornography, things like that?
It could, yes.
And overall, with this marination in violence, what effect does that have on the offender?
So when you have somebody that's consuming violence in that way, what really happens is a desensitization to that violence, where they start to really, again, it becomes more about their plans and preparation of how they're going to use it versus really kind of contemplating the impacts of that violence. And really that desensitization and sometimes even comfort in seeing it, because it's helping them resolve their struggles that they're having.
And then you mentioned previously, then the next step along this pathway is the research and planning stage. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so at this stage, they've, like I said, they have the grievance likely, they have the violent ideation, they know that they're going to use violence to resolve that grievance. And so the research and planning stage is really to figure out how are they going to do that. And so the research and planning is a very individualized process, and it can take up to 2 years. We've seen in our research of where you have different searches that could happen, you have different plans that you're thinking of, different locations that you're seeking out that potentially you would want to have as your location you would attack. And so there's a process as they go through that, what kind of weaponry, what type of tools would they need to do the attack, when they would conduct it, all of that.
And I think you mentioned this is where someone can start to fixate on infamous attacks or attackers.
Yes. As they start to review more of those attack details, there may be key factors where they want to adapt something that was used or change something that was used so that they can be more successful in their attack.
And you mentioned that the research and planning, this stage in your research has shown it can take up to 2 years. What about the prior stages that we've talked about, the grievance and the ideation, violent ideation? Do those have kind of a time frame, or is that fluid as well?
That's fluid, and again, the grievance and ideation stage, along with research and planning, it's harder because it's more individualized. And so you can be involved in that, and unless you're telling people about it, no one really knows how long you've had that grievance or how long you have had consumption of violence or fixated on the violent ideation. And so what we see from grievance to research and planning that can take longer, that you see as they methodically kind of go through, and specifically research and planning we know can go anywhere from a month to 2 years because of how detailed oriented they are in that planning process.
And some of that planning, is some of that kind of physical planning, can it be, or is it, are we talking more mental planning as well?
It could be both, right? So you can actually have individuals that will, go surveil different, targets, or be involved in trying to understand time of day or the best situation for them to go forward and commit that attack. But then you can also just have the need to mentally prepare for the plans that you have, and you can have somebody really thinking about that. And so again, it's very individualized, and so unless you're looking at someone's digital devices, you don't really know if this stuff is happening.
After the research and planning stage, what would be the next step along this path?
The next step after research and planning is preparation, and really this is where you actually go get the tools to do the attack. So if you think about it in this way, research and planning, you've developed your list of everything you need, you know what you're going to do, metaphorically speaking, right? And then you go forward in preparation to obtain those tools to do the attack. And we find that when individuals enter preparation, this is the duration that they're in this step is really quite diminished compared to the research and planning. So we will find that individuals, once they enter preparation, they can ultimately do the attack within 24 hours to 7 days when they obtain the weaponry to do the attack.
And you mentioned the obtaining of weaponry or items necessary for the attack. Can someone's resources or access to resources play a role in this pathway?
Yes, it can make someone's time on the pathway go faster. So if I already have access to weaponry, or if I already have a knowledge base of that, I don't need to spend much time in preparation. And so really you see someone progress faster if they have knowledge of weaponry, or have access to that, or have knowledge or access to the target that they choose.
Now, after preparation, where do we come next?
So after preparation, we see the next stage is breach. Breach is really in close proximity to the attack. A lot of times you don't see breach until after the attack. What breach is a dry run or security probe to make sure that they're going to be successful with the attack, and then you have the attack.
And could this breach, could that involve the selection of certain tools amongst the tools or items that someone has gathered in their preparation?
Yeah, so really from where breach stands is in that moment, they're ready and they're kind of what we would call in that last step, right? And so at any moment they can go forward and do the attack. And so a lot of times that will be the staging of the weapons, the gathering the weapons, and being able to be ready to do the attack when they want to. So as an example, we've seen in other cases where we've had those weapons staged like in the bathroom of the building of where the attack occurred.
And so finally we get to attack. Can you tell us about that stage in this process?
Yeah, so the attack is when everything comes together for them. This is they've been considering, planning, and preparing, and this is at the time then when they are going to go forward and propel to action. And as part of that, there's going to be an attack that utilizes violence.
And is this something that in your research has been characterized as a highly personal aspect?
Yes, it is a highly personal, attack. A lot of times when we're looking at these cases, it's very specific to that offender.
And can you explain to the court the idea of the attack being both targeted and opportunistic?
Yeah, so when we look at these cases, what we find is that when someone is selecting the targets, they are going to look at three different factors. They're going to look at what's desirable to them, what's the most desirable location attack that really resolves my grievance, that resolves my the injustice that I'm carrying. What is that's most desirable? Then they have to look at what is vulnerable, because that most desirable target may not be vulnerable. And then they, after that, will consider what's available. And so you may have someone who has considered and planned and prepared and has, a very specific plan, but ultimately find that it's not going to happen in the way that they have been thinking about it and fantasizing about it. And so ultimately take what's available. And usually there's a high vulnerability to what's available that makes it a successful attack.
And what is can you talk to, and I think you mentioned this before, but the idea of how fantasy versus reality plays a role in this pathway?
So when you have somebody who is on the pathway and struggling with the different things that have impacted them, and whether it's injustice or a slight or humiliation that has occurred, what you find is that when they're in this grievance, ideation, research, and planning, they're thinking a lot about this. And they are also starting to really fantasize about what it would look like. And so it's not uncommon for a lot of thought and planning to go into it, and for fantasy to be a part of that. What would be the best case scenario? What would it look like? When you have somebody who has been struggling with being wronged in their life, they start to think about potentially, again, if I want to resolve this, if I want to feel better, who ultimately deserves to pay for what's happened to me? And so you start to see a lot of that projection and fantasy that can happen as they are contemplating propelling to that violent act while they're on the pathway.
And once someone, after they've progressed down this pathway and they are undertaking the attack, does your research show, or are you familiar with, how does that affect the attacker as they are carrying this out?
Yeah, so not based on research, but based on experience and involvement with cases where there has been a mass attack that has occurred. What we find is that because they've considered, planned, and prepared and been methodical about that, that when they get to that actual action of doing the attack, what you will see and you will hear is that it was really focused and really somebody seemed very calm, even though they were perpetrating a massive violent attack.
And what is can you talk to the court about the relationship between suicide and homicide, or suicidal thoughts and homicidal thoughts?
Yes. So in the work that we've been doing at the VAU, what we've seen, we've looked at these cases, is that there's a thin line that emerges between suicidality and homicidality. It's not to say that everybody who's suicidal is going to become homicidal. That's not what I'm saying. But when we look at specifically individuals that have committed acts of targeted violence, we find that a lot of times that homicidality started with suicidality. And so we know in our research that almost half of individuals that went on to commit acts of targeted violence experienced suicidal ideation prior to the attack. And when we could specifically look at those cases, 70% of the time it was within 1 year of the attack. Secret Services also did research on this with school shooters and found that over 70% of them experienced suicidal ideation or suicidal behavior before they did the attack. So what we see develop in these cases is this hopelessness, this despair, this unbearable pain that someone is experiencing. And when they're in that hopeless, helpless place, they start to really think about individuals or factors that have put them there, and that anger and blame starts to get projected to who needs to pay for what's happened to me, who's responsible for this. And then you really see then that being projected into violence and that homicidal act.
And a lot of understanding that the aim, I guess, the ultimate goal of your research and the work that you do is towards prevention. A lot of what you've mentioned is, I think, what you've termed as observed behaviors. Can you explain to the court kind of the challenge of observing behaviors?
Absolutely. So the pathway to violence, or the pathway to intended violence, like I said, it's been around since the 90s, but it had largely been a theoretical model that we had followed in the threat assessment, threat management community. And so in 2024, we had the great opportunity to look specifically at the pathway to intended violence and look at 59 active shooters and see, what do we know about these steps? Is it actually, a valid tool for us to think about? Is it reliable? And so in that, we were able to look at those cases, and we found that 58% of the time, all of the steps of the pathway were intact and observable. So that's great news that 58% you can see progressing through these steps. But the real challenge is that 42% are not observable. And so it's really, in the threat assessment community, when we're looking at prevention, we really need to focus on what's present, what's not present, and then the unknown, and really using that threat assessment and threat management strategies to really uncover that unknown so that we can progress to preventing the violent act. The other aspect that we found in that research that is important is that around 37% of the time where the individuals had no observable behaviors that were present related to the pathway, or not all the pathway steps were observable, 100% of the time the individuals had access to weapons, or 100% of the time they had access to the target. And so that really goes again to how someone can progress fast on the pathway if they have weaponry or knowledge of or access to the target.
And what does it also speak to the idea of I guess secrecy, or can you speak to that? How does that play a role in?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when we're dealing with predatory violence, that's the other challenging aspect, is in order for someone to be successful with predatory violence, they need to progress from considering, planning, and preparing without anybody knowing about it. So what we find as part of this is that as someone is progressing on the pathway, it's very important that they keep that quiet, that they are secret in that. Because if they do not, they will not be successful. And when we're looking at, the place that we are with different, targeted attacks that happen, Really, it's about how do I get to the other side of this and be successful so that I can be seen and be heard and be known, and that's where that notoriety piece can come in. And so it's very, we see that a lot, where even to the point where law enforcement, when they make contact with someone who maybe they've gotten information about that someone's concerned, that in that moment the individual will really downplay those concerns and really minimize it and really get them to not feel concerned, so they will go away so they can continue to plan and prepare to do the attack. The ultimate goal is to be successful.
And so this pathway really is kind of a goal-oriented pathway.
Yeah, so goal-directed behavior that's moving from thought to action. So the thought part of it is the grievance and the ideation, and really as law enforcement officers and practitioners, we're really trying to understand when someone moves from thought to action. It's when they're starting to apply those behaviors that we get concerned as they're progressing, right? And if from a prevention standpoint, the earlier we can get involved, the better.
And I may have asked you about this, but I wanted to step back to the attack portion of the pathway. That can be both pre-planned and opportunistic in terms of the victims. Is that accurate?
Yes, it doesn't. In these attacks, the victims of the crimes, they don't necessarily have to have a personal relationship with the offender. It's more about the number of casualties in that attack.
And speaking of the number of casualties, based on your research and experience, with regards to folks who have used or attempted to use bombs or explosive devices, does that hold any significance to you in the work that you do?
Yes, so in looking at the experience we have with these different cases, you will find that when you have interest in bomb-making materials or in constructing bombs, that makes, again, if you're looking at how can I stand out, how can I be known differently than others that are committing these acts, it sets the stage for you to be more knowledgeable, more sophisticated. It also has the impact potentially to increase the number of casualties, which will also increase your notoriety. You have, again, a way to set yourself apart. And also the other aspect is that anytime there's bombs or explosives being used, there's real power that's attached to that. And I think that when you're looking at individuals that are trying to resolve grievances and take back that control or punish others for what's happened to them, that ultimately you see that come into play with the explosives. And if you look at the number of targeted attacks that we have happen in the United States, it's hard to stand out with how many are happening. And so it's one way to really kind of set that stage different for that person.
And so that is part of the goals, I guess, in some of these attacks is to stand out and be the best or worst or most famous. Is that fair to say?
Yes, we really see that one of the motivating drivers is to be a somebody versus a nobody. And then in addition to that, resolving that injustice that has happened to them.
I want to step back to the preparation stage. One of the things that's mentioned in your articles is the creation of artifacts. Can you talk to the court about that?
Because of the individualized nature of these attacks, you really find that people will do things specific that's important to them. And so there could be different artifacts that are created. It can be, writings on the weapon or on the ammunition. It can be notes that is left behind. It can be maps that are drawn. Again, they are considering, planning, and preparing how they want this attack to be successful. And those different events, given what you're thinking about, could be props in that bigger plan.
In your research, can you talk to the court about the role of, or the incidents involving when a family member is a victim of one of these targeted attacks?
Yeah, so we find that in our research, it's probably only around 10 to 13% where you have a primary family member that could be a victim at the beginning of the crime or during the crime. And again, we don't have key research findings that say exactly why that is. Anecdotally, what we've seen in our cases that we've been exposed to is, one, it can be that individual that was killed was a part of that original grievance set, or that establishment of that grievance and injustice that occurred for that person. The other aspect that we have seen is that it could be because of their care and love for that person, that they don't want their loved one to have to see what they're about to do, and so they will, end up killing them before the attack. And then we've also seen it used as a way to punish people that are left behind. And so those are the three different occurrences that we've seen with the cases that we've worked.
Thank you, Dr. Gibson. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you.
For the defense,
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Gibson.
Good morning.
The common thread in your direct testimony was really this grievance. That seems to be a central part of this type of violence. Is that right?
So a lot of times we see a grievance, yes.
I think you indicated that 21% of the time you don't find out what the grievance is.
Yes, 21% of the time it was determined to be unable to be determined in that research project.
But 79% of the time you were able to determine the grievance.
Correct.
And in some ways it sounds like from what you're describing, the attack tends to be some sort of revenge for whatever the grievance is.
That's one potential motivating driver for it.
Okay. I was looking at some of your articles and I noticed something. You indicated that research has shown at least one bystander witnessed one or more concerning behaviors in 100% of the cases reviewed.
Yes, that was the research that was published in 2024. Is that the one you're referencing? Yes, that's correct.
Let me double check that. I have August of 2023. This is the Pathway to Targeted Violence Camp Early Intervention Work.
Okay, that was an article. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So 100% of the time in this research, bystanders witness one or more concerning behaviors.
So, can you state the first part, though, what you stated with that, with the actual quote of what was written in the article?
Research has shown at least one bystander witnessed one or more concerning behaviors in 100% of the cases.
Yes, and so we have found that in the research that we've been able to complete, that a lot of times that bystanders will see concerning behaviors, and we've seen that it can be one, but it more likely has been even more than that.
point in the article where you're reading from.
Page 47, Your Honor.
Thank you.
About halfway through the bottom paragraph.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. And you didn't speak much about it on your direct, but explain to me what leakage is.
Yes, so leakage is something that we see where you have the individual either through writings or through actual conversations or interactions with individuals. It leaks their fixation on violence or leaks their fixation on when that leaking of that fixation on violence, it can be either suicidal or homicidal kind of themes, where the individuals around them will wonder, okay, what's that all about? And we tend to look for grievance or tend to look for leakage and see if it's present.
And this same paper that I was just speaking about, on page 48, under the leakage section, you note that 88% of active shooters aged 17 and younger were found to have leaked their intent to commit violence.
Yes.
So a huge majority have some sort of leakage, right?
So we see leakage being present very often, yes, and we see it being present in adolescents more than adults.
On direct, you were asked about the consumption of violent content, including video games, right?
Correct.
There's a lot of violent content out there, right?
Correct.
And most of us are consumers of it at some level, right?
Correct.
There's television shows, right?
Mhm.
Movies,
Yes.
video games.
Yes, there's lots of content out there for people to consume.
I happen to like the show You, right? Like that kind of thing. Doesn't make people who consume that content inevitably going to commit some sort of targeted act, correct?
No, it's not causative.
So I think what you were speaking about when you talked about that is that in this sort of stair step that you have, as somebody is progressing along that, they start consuming a lot of it. Is that fair?
It's really in that step specifically, we see them consuming that violence, and it can be in different forms or fashions, and the volume can definitely be there as well. But it's really just kind of defining what that is, and meaning not just ideation, but violent ideation is the really kind of focus.
And so in that sort of step up, you would typically see some sort of increased consumption of that kind of content. Is that fair?
So I don't really necessarily increase, but more, I would say, if we were to look at the totality of factors, you're going to see a theme, and the theme is going to consistently be of violence. Whether that volume is there is going to be dependent on their specific life circumstances. You know, so if they have access to those devices or have access to different content, you could see it increase as they started to become more fixated. Absolutely.
But you typically see that sort of fixation on that content.
On violence, yes.
Okay. No further questions, Your Honor.
Further, Mr. Ball?
Yes, Your Honor, just a few follow-up questions. With regards to what counsel asked you about, mentioned revenge as a motivator, and you said it could be one of them. What are some of the other motivators?
So you can have, again, for somebody that is in this space, you can have that desire to kill, that desire to be killed. You can have the actual injustice that they're focused on. You can also have that ability to solve an unbearable problem for them, this unbearable pain that they want that resolved. And so you start to see those themes develop in addition to the revenge, right? The revenge goes specifically to an injustice that has occurred or a slight. Not everybody has that. People can have global distaste and anger and frustration about their life and where they are, and really blame a lot of people for that because that's where they are in the time of their life.
You were also asked about bystander witnesses. Do bystander witnesses always know that they are a bystander witness when they are, I guess, witnessing this behavior?
Not necessarily. I mean, bystanders are in a position to have that front row seat to look at and interact with that person. And unfortunately, what we see is even with that access to that data, a lot of times they are, again, looking at that picture and it becomes more normalized to them, or they're not able to understand the significance that's attached to that. So we see limited reporting of bystanders that are closest to those persons that go on to commit attacks.
Could also be the possibility that, bystander witnesses may not make themselves available. There may be bystander witnesses that observe behavior but just don't say anything.
Correct.
Or in some cases, they could be victims of the attacker.
Yes, that is true.
when you talk about leakage being present in a majority of cases involving adolescents, that can come in lots of different forms. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
It could be schoolwork.
Yes, there could be themes that come out in the schoolwork that's turned in.
Okay. And it may not be something that at the time is concerning to the teacher or the school. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it kind of depends on the volume or the context of where that's coming in, right? And so they are seeing one slice that day related to that content, so they may be able to then think of it as it's routine, or maybe marginalize it or minimize it. And it's not until you kind of start to put all those puzzle pieces together, or those different slices together, that you really see the true picture that's there.
And if someone is withdrawn or isolated, would that kind of assist or that make the possibility of leakage diminish?
So it definitely can contribute to that. So what the bystander would see, they wouldn't hear or see the leakage. What they would see is that person withdrawing. They'd see that person kind of going, doing things on their own, or being, maybe depressed or that type of behavior. And so it doesn't technically fit the definition of leakage, because again, it's that behavior is withdrawing from that action or interacting with others. But if there was more conversation or looking at that, you might find that there would be more content available. And that's the hard part for bystanders just in general, is that it's very easy to discount what you see, or to not understand the significance of it, because you can easily say they're just having a bad day today. This is, how do I know specifically what this person is going through? That I just have this very narrow optic. And so you find that minimization happens a lot with our bystanders, and there's many reasons why they don't come forward and they struggle with that reporting pattern.
Thank you, no further questions.
Just for that.
Very briefly, I'm going to talk about bystanders again. So your research is a post hoc view of these situations, right?
What you post? You
Post hoc. So these events have already occurred, right?
Yes, so the research that we've talked about today is on individuals that have committed acts of targeted violence.
And so you looked at the materials available in those situations, right?
Correct.
So we're not talking about 100% of cases have people in advance say, I'm seeing something concerning, right?
No, so it's in the research that we looked at, we were able to code those files up into the time of where the attack occurred, and that's what we relied on for that. In my casework and experience, that we deal with individuals who haven't committed acts of targeted violence, and so we see some of that inaction with the bystander reporting come to light in those cases as well.
Absolutely. So in the research, you were looking after the fact for information that people after the fact say, I saw some concerning behavior, I didn't realize it was concerning necessarily.
Not necessarily in that way. So when we coded those files, we coded the files up until the time of the attack, and didn't look at the stuff that happens after the attack, to specifically look at and inform that, to basically try to make it be as pristine as possible in the event of what would be seen before the attack happened, and looking at that. Now in other discussions, we hear and talk with people after the attack as well, that kind of informs this, what we're talking about. But I just want to be clear that I'm not taking, in that research, we're not looking at somebody who says, oh, I saw this and I didn't think it was significant. We're looking at what there was reported, what they saw before the attack happened.
Oh, okay. So in 100% of the cases reviewed, there was at least one bystander who witnessed one or more concerning behaviors, as in before the attack raised an alarm bell.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't think I understood that fully. No further questions.
Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you, sir.
evidence for the state?
No, Your Honor, the state rests for purposes of this hearing.
All right, so we conclude the state's evidence for the sentencing hearing, and by agreement, we'll be beginning at 9.
We'll be beginning at 9:30 Tuesday morning with the evidence for the defense. Is there anything else that we need to take up before we recess today?
Not for the state.
Not for the defense.
All right, very well. We'll stand in recess until 9:30 Tuesday.